Hello, and welcome to Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jennifer Chambers. You know that I'm passionate about uncovering the truth. Here, we're taking that passion to the dark heart of the Pacific Northwest. As a true crime and historical writer, I've spent years immersed in the chilling archives of this region. Each week, we'll explore cases, both ancient and modern, of murder, unexplained events, strange places, and those who have simply vanished. We'll dig into the research, connecting the dots between past and present, revealing the threads of mystery that weave through our incredible, yet often unsettling, landscape. Prepare to be captivated as we discover that while times may change, the darkest aspects of human nature remain hauntingly the same. Small town Oregon. The summer of the year 2000. A 15-year-old girl left her friend's house at dusk and never returned home. In the years that followed, her disappearance became the crime of the century for the town of Coquille, a town of fewer than 4,000 people. Investigators jockeyed, a boyfriend became the suspect, evidence disappeared, and the case went cold, and finally a man was convicted. But decades later, his conviction was overturned, and what remains is a victim still without justice, the justice that she deserves. I'm Jen Chambers, and this is Same Crime, Different Time. Today, we're talking about the story of Leah Freeman. What happened to Leah? Let's begin on the night that she vanished. Part 1, The Disappearance. It was June 28th, the year 2000, in Coos County, Oregon. The town of Coquille is near the Oregon coast, and it's a cool, temperate area. The town itself is situated near the Coquille River, and as such might be a little more cool and breezy, even in the summertime. But sometimes, the summertimes really are mild here, and the light lingers late in the summer evenings. On this day, Leah Freeman was 15 years old. She'd been dropped off at her friend Sherry Mitchell's house around 7 p.m. by her boyfriend, Nicholas McGuffin. He went to the house later that evening, about 9 p.m., to pick her up. And Sherry told him that Leah had walked out of the house after they had an argument. Leah was seen leaving on foot. It looked as if maybe she was going towards the high school that was north of Sherry's house. It's the kind of small town where those summer nights bring all the teens and young adults outside, where everyone's hanging out and talking, getting together. But nobody reported seeing Leah. Nicholas was worried when he tried to pick her up and she wasn't there. He started to drive all around town to see if he could find her. He really tried all their regular local spots. He went into the businesses and areas. He checked with her mom and her sister. And he was even pulled over by police during the search. After about 4 or 5 hours, according to the Oregon Public Broadcasting article, he drove by her house somewhere near 2:30 in the morning. In Leah's window, the light was on, so Nicholas thought that meant she'd come home. He was relieved, of course, so he went back to his own house and went to bed. But Leah's family were frantic when they got up the next day to find that she was still not home. Nicholas was contacted, and they and Nicholas searched all over the town again. Eventually, they went to the police department. Now, unfortunately, the police department refused to take a missing persons report because she'd only been gone 12 hours, and she was still considered that she might have either run away or that maybe she just hadn't come home yet. Part of the thing that's interesting about this is that at the time that a child can be reported as missing, it used to be very confusing. Reports and newspapers and even police departments themselves, they didn't give any definitive time frame when a person would be considered missing and the police would help you. But often, all over on the news, all over, it was reported that you had to wait 12 to 24 hours. Now, in 1974, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act had been created to help fund programs that give shelter to runaway and homeless youths, but it also decriminalized the act of running away. So that kind of seems like it should have made it easier for people to give help to people who thought their kids were missing. But then in 1982, the Missing Children Act started making it a practice to to collect and share the information about the missing and endangered children who were reported. And then in 1999, the Missing, Exploited, and Runaway Children Protection Act updated the Act of 1982, which then established the National Crime Information Center Missing Person File, which is called NCIC. And that's what local law enforcement uses to track and enter missing children's information, according to the FBI. So currently, there's no waiting period that you have to do before you report your child missing to the police. And in fact, the 24 to 48 hours that it's been reported you have to wait is a total myth. And those 48 hours are crucial in finding clues and details relevant to a crime. But that wasn't necessarily known then. The police interviewed Nicholas a couple days later on June 30th, when Leah still hadn't been found. Nicholas had been looking along with Leah's family ever since they'd found her missing. A week later, one of her shoes was found by a searcher at a gas station on the edge of town. Nothing else happened until a few days later, when the other shoe was discovered by a deputy who'd been searching on the edge of a forest that was pretty far from where the other shoe had been found. Sadly, on August 5th, 2000, her body was found in a wooded embankment outside of Coquille. She was wearing most of her clothes except for her shoes, one of her socks, and her underwear. Because of the advanced state of the decomposition after 5 weeks, they couldn't get a lot of evidence from the scene of the crime. That's where technology was at that point. Now, the shoes did get sent to the crime lab for analysis. One of the shoes was reported to have blood on it, but they didn't find anything out. It was still so early in the DNA analysis game. Investigators were confronted pretty much immediately with this truth. There weren't any eyewitnesses. There was no clear footage or surveillance footage to find her. They didn't have ring cameras then. And there was no forensic match that pointed to anybody. So it kind of got messy. CBS News said, quote, "The emotional murder case of Oregon teenager Leah Freeman brought tears to the defendant's eyes and accused investigators of chasing the wrong man for almost 10 years. Because the early suspect was her then-boyfriend, 18-year-old Nicholas McGuffin. He had been with Leah that night. He dropped her off at the friend's house and later was reported having been seen driving around town looking for her." One article put it that it really destroyed part of the town. Quote, "When Mick McGuffin pleaded not guilty to the murder of his high school sweetheart, Leah Freeman, it stirred up anger from both of the families involved in the case." Unquote. That makes sense. So he was a suspect, but there wasn't any direct evidence that linked him to her disappearance. For the next decade or so, her case remained active but unresolved, until there was a new police chief. Coquille's new police chief, Mark Daniels, reopened it in 2008. The forensic evidence was re-examined, and then in 2011, McGuffin was convicted of manslaughter, though acquitted of murder, under the then allowance that Oregon had of non-unanimous jury verdicts. But as we'll see, this conviction wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another chapter of injustice. Part 2, Conviction and Exoneration. So, to reiterate, in 2011, McGuffin was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to a decade in prison. Oregon's jury system permitted 10-2 verdicts at the time, ununanimous. So that meant that unanimity was not required to be convicted for some felonies. So he was sent to jail. But cracks in the case soon began to emerge. The Oregon State Police Crime Lab failed to disclose a trace amount of DNA from an unknown male that was found on one of the shoes. And according to McGuffin's attorneys, quote, "Nicholas McGuffin was not in any way involved in the kidnapping and murder of Leah Freeman and is completely innocent of the crime," unquote. Part of the controversy around this case is that when he'd taken over the case, Police Chief Daniels involved a non-police organization to influence the case. He used an organization called the Vidocq Society, VIDOCQ, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, to look at the evidence. This society was made up in Pennsylvania originally of people who were formerly law enforcement. The Oregon State Bar states that, quote, with 84 full members and more than 100 associated volunteers, the Vidocq Society is a voluntary brain trust of retired and working criminologists that meet the third Thursday of every month to assist in the investigation of cold case murders from all over the country. Meetings take place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, I wasn't able to find out in any of the documentation that I looked at for research if everybody who was involved with this particular case was formerly law enforcement or not. This group was actually profiled in a book called The Murder Room by Michael Capuzzo, who is a crime writer. It was interesting because at any rate, one person in this group, a man named Richard Walter, took special interest in this case. Michael Capuzzo called him a modern-day Sherlock Holmes in his book. Richard Walter came up with her own theory to fit the evidence, and it was widely read, and actually it was used on an episode of the TV crime show 2020 about this case. It influenced the investigators, I believe, and that was part of why an innocent man was imprisoned. However, in 2023, an article in the New York Magazine discredited Richard Walter, this man who had put together so much about the case. He was accused of fabricating evidence and of solving cases in his past that never actually existed, making up phony credentials. In December 2019, Nicholas McGuffin's conviction had been overturned. According to the New York Magazine, he was, quote, sent to the Snake River Correctional Institution upon his arrest or upon his conviction in Eastern Oregon, which was a notorious facility for violent inmates. He cooked in the prison kitchen and worked in a firefighting crew, cutting fire breaks in 16-hour shifts for $6 a day. Despite the public nature of the false claims that Walter made in the past, he is still active. The New York Magazine was unable to get his statement. And on August 1st, 2025, Nicholas McGuffin became the first person in Oregon to receive a certificate of innocence. This acknowledges that he is innocent of all crimes for which he was wrongfully convicted, quote unquote. It was found that the police had made mistakes in DNA analysis and evidence handling, and that things that had corroborated Nicholas's story of where he'd been at the time she was murdered was excluded purposefully. So the fallout, Nicholas was able to sue, and more than $14 million in settlements have been made so far. $9 million from the state forensic lab, and $5 million from local law enforcement agencies. But what about Leah? Her killer remains unknown. The evidence that led to McGuffin's conviction was never enough, and the undisclosed DNA points to someone else entirely. The case remains open. Part 3, Forensic Evidence, Missing Leads, and Open Questions. In many cold case investigations like this, the trail grows faint. But here we have a teenage girl who is missing her shoes, a body who is decayed, and a very limited forensic match. But key items raise more questions. The unknown male DNA that was found on her shoe. This wasn't disclosed. They also didn't disclose that there were paint chips on her shirt that did not match McGuffin's car. I found that there was a bunch of Reddit discussions and blogs that raised this. This is not official, so I don't 100% know that, but I have read that, and it kind of reflects the community's idea of their outrage about all of this. Even years later, his attorneys alleged that the investigators fabricated and suppressed so much evidence and made up blood evidence that didn't even exist. Leah's mother did create a website to keep the investigation alive, and for years, the case has hovered between headline and cold case file. But it raises a lot of other questions. How do these small town dynamics affect investigations? How did the failures and the tunnel vision of the prosecution, how did that derail justice for so long? Part 4, Human Impact. Leah Freeman was a 15-year-old girl. Prom photographs, high school friends, a life not yet lived. But she's also an emblem of what happens when justice fails like this. In court, when McGuffin pleaded not guilty, her mother, Cora, said, quote, "I was staring at that man that's believed to be my daughter's killer. I could hardly look at him. I nearly fainted," unquote. And on the other side, there was a young man who'd been convicted, imprisoned, and exonerated eventually, but still branded by association. After he was released, McGuffin told media on OPB, quote, "I'm still trying to put my life back together after all this time. And I just don't want anyone to forget about Leah, because her killer is still out there," unquote. The ripple effects remain in Coquille. There was an unsolved murder, broken trust, questions handed down to new generations. This real killer remains unknown. And the sheriff's department and the crime lab and the justice system in that area all must carry the scars. Leah's memory asks us to remember both the person who she was and the system that failed her. It's not just a murder, it's about the assumptions we make and how even law enforcement can make these kinds of assumptions, and also what we expect of justice. If you're a memoir or nonfiction writer, like I know many of you are, imagine a time where you believed the friend or partner you trusted. Then imagine being blamed for their disappearance with no clear proof. Imagine the public narrative turning on you. Then imagine finally being told you were innocent, but nobody can give back the years you lost. That's the personal dimension of at least one side. The injustice to Leah Freeman and her family is absolutely incalculable, but also to Nicholas McGuffin. Where do we end up? Her case remains unsolved, and his conviction was overturned, but justice and real closure for anyone hasn't been achieved. We still have a family that's grieving and a young life that was cut short, a town that still asks questions. If you live in or know of Coos County, or if you are friends with Leah or knew Nick, or knew someone who knows someone, please revisit this case, ask questions. Every missing piece matters. And please give it to the authorities. Hopefully something can be done and we can find who really killed her. Thank you for joining me today on Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jen Chambers. Keep your voice loud, your curiosity sharp, and your promise to these victims of the past alive. The sources for this are at my Substack at JB Chambers. Until next time.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Thanks for listening today. Please review and rate wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps out the show. And please leave us a voicemail at the Spotify link. Also, you can always feel free to send us an email at scdtmail@gmail.com or www.jennifer-chambers.com.